Hey Tim, how's your leg? Are you still on crutches?
Oh, I'm good. I'm walking around. Yeah, I feel pretty good.
Dear.
Good morning, Tim. Good morning, everyone.
There's food if you want anything.
Yeah, you got
All right.
breakfast, bro.
Yeah.
Gosh, thank you.
Yeah. Good morning.
SWAC appreciation.
Yeah. 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 If anybody from the public, if you're interested, there's bagels and cream cheese. Well, you're welcome to help yourself.
Good morning, Tim. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Keith, sorry I couldn't be there in person today. Just have a large payroll day. Got to take care of here at work this morning. So, but
yeah,
I'm here on Zoom.
No worries. Thanks for being here, Keith.
Sure, of course.
I'll give it just 2 more minutes and then we'll call the meeting to order. We have a couple people coming in, a couple people serving up bagels.
You're pushing.
We have enough.
Hard.
6 online? Okay.
No, March 24th. Yeah. 20 or the 19th, so almost 2.
Yeah, yeah.
19. Eagles over there.
All right, I will call the meeting to order. So welcome to the April 16th, 2024 Solid Waste Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Tim Brownell. I'm the director of the Solid Waste Department here for Deschutes County. And joined by members of the SWAC committee up here and folks from Parametrics, our consulting firm that's helped us throughout this process to get us to where we are today. So I'm going to start with roll call of committee members, make sure we have quorum. So if you'll just indicate if you're here or online. Paul Bertagna, City of Sisters.
Here.
Morning, Paul.
Good morning.
Mayor Ed Fitch of City of Redmond.
Here.
Good morning, Mayor. Erica Lindberg of Republic Services.
I'm here. I'm online.
Good morning, Erica.
Good
Erwin
morning.
Swetnam, Cascade Disposal.
Present.
Jared Black, citizen at large.
Here.
Morning, Jared.
Morning.
Keith Casares, citizen at large.
Here, good morning all.
Morning. Chris Ogren, citizen at large.
Here.
Morning, Chris. Robin Vora, citizen at large.
Here.
Luke Dines, citizen at large. Not present. Cassie Lacy, City of Bend. And Mike Riley, the Environmental Center.
Here.
We have quorum. So the first order of business is to review the March meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve? There are amendments, but we'll get to.
I move approval of the minutes from March.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
So moved by Mike Riley, seconded by Erwin Swetnam. Any discussion on the minutes? And we did receive some minute modifications from Robin.
Yeah, and so it looks like you hand those out to everybody.
Yeah, we did send them out and they should be in the board member packet.
I guess this page here.
Okay.
In the red there is the edits I requested for the meeting.
Okay.
I don't know if you want me to read them, but everybody.
Do people had a chance to review them, or would you like Robin to walk through them?
Oh, you got them on the screen up there too.
Yeah. Why don't you walk through them quickly?
Okay, so instead of Robin Vora commenting, he believes that the property is not appropriate mitigation for sage grouse given far ranging avian predators and for deer, elk, and pronghorn given anticipated levels of disturbance. And also given ODFW comments. And then under air quality, dust devils, I just said in Milliken Valley. And then just a grammar thing on topic 14, crossed out the interest in. I think those all make sense.
Any other amendments? Any other comments? Okay, above for approval for the March meeting minutes as amended. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. So the next item on the agenda is time for public comment. So any interested parties who have signed in, can you come on up to speak? We are going to try and limit public comments to 3 minutes as we have the committee some discussions and hopefully a recommendation to make today. So who would like to speak?
Me first.
All right. And if you'll bring up a sign up sheet, Andrew, thanks. So state your name.
My name is Steve Payer. I'm a resident of Central Oregon since 1981. Licensed real estate broker. And I live at Deepwell on Roth East. But I have no financial interest in which way it goes. In fact, Linda made the comment earlier, why doesn't the county buy both sides? Which I think that'd be a great option, you know. We have all the dirt out at Roth East. I mean, yards and yards of dirt to cover everything up. So that can be a win-win. I've testified before, made comment before, and something happened here just the last couple of days that's interesting. Coming in from Milliken, cresting over Horse Ridge, dropping into that basin, there was a recreation person, big motorhome, and had a huge bonfire going out in the, I don't know if it's private property or BLM, south of the Badlands, right there close. And that was the source of this pallor of smoke.
The client sold property on a promissory note trustee. And they, no, so then the
Somebody online is your mic is not muted.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll start again. There was this huge big cloud of smoke and I saw it and I thought, what is that? And then as I got down the hill, here's a guy recreating. And all of a sudden the light bulb went on. Odor wise, what will happen on a day when we have an inversion and from the landfill, there's going to be odor and some person is going to get out of the car there at the wildland parking area and go, what's that smell? And I hadn't thought about it before, and not that it matters because I'm sure you folks have already made up your mind, or at least are almost there. But anyhow, it was just an observation that I thought was interesting. I mentioned the dirt. Again, I'll mention again the wildlife fears and the hand wringing and whatnot. There are no wildlife out there. Sorry, I occasionally see during the summertime a little band of pronghorn, but there's no mule deer, there's no elk. I had a bear walk by the house one day. So I think those issues perhaps that ODF and W has brought up may be specious at best. And the farm impact issue, there's no farms out there. There's certainly not going to be farms impacted by 35 trips a day. You've got a ranch to the west that is presently on the market, allegedly for sage grouse habitat. The people looking at the Golden Basin Ranch are talking about buying it for sage grouse. Doug McGee to the east and Jim Anspach, they're cattle ranchers. Trucks and landfill isn't going to bother a cow. Cows don't care. And finally, the recreation people, they're either on Pine Mountain, they're west of the road. I've never seen a hang glider flying over my house. They all stay where the updrafts are out to the west. The OHV people, they're not over east of Pine Mountain. Even though there is some BLM, it's not part of the OHV platted out bike area. So with that, I'll say you folks have done a yeoman's service trying to weigh everything, and thank you for your efforts, and we'll see what happens. I
Thank you,
think
Steve.
gotta buy both.
All right. Mark Salvo.
Morning.
Morning, Mark.
My name is Mark Salvo. I'm with Oregon Natural Desert Association. I'm here this morning speaking to this letter, presenting this letter to the Solid Waste Committee. I believe it's in your packet. It is joined by Oregon Natural Desert Association, Central Oregon Land Watch, and Oregon League of Conservation Voters. My comments are these. As this committee considers your recommendation for siting a future landfill in Deschutes County, we urge you to also advocate as part of that recommendation for the strongest possible mitigation for developing either the Moon Pit or the Rothies location. While each location may be capable of supporting a landfill, as we presented before, neither is suitable for this purpose for an array of environmental, social, economic, and other concerns. Developing at either site will have deleterious effects on wildlife resources and the public's enjoyment of public lands for generations. However, providing for a comprehensive mitigation program from development beyond what is required from, let's face it, minimal state and county policies can help to ameliorate these impacts. Deschutes County's adoption of a robust mitigation program for what will also be the first landfill developed in the state of Oregon in 3 decades would also serve as an important model for other jurisdictions around the state for decades to come. Moreover, even extraordinary compensatory mitigation for developing a new landfill would cost only a fraction of the immense budget associated with this project. So this committee's recommendation of a robust mitigation program would help to launch a conversation with decision makers, constituents, community organizations, state and federal agencies, potential funders, and landowners to design and implement measures to conserve wildlife, protect recreation opportunities at either location. So thank you for consideration of this request.
Thank you very much. I don't have anybody else listed. Is there anybody else in person who wants to make public comment? Thank you. Sue, is there anybody online who has a hand raised for public comment? No? Okay, hearing none and seeing none.
Question about this one we received.
Yeah, I'll speak to that. So, yeah, so I'll close public comment. For the members of the SWAC committee, we did receive yesterday, in addition to the ONDA and Land Watch letter of comment, we did receive something from the Oregon, ODFMW comments. That was a 6-pager. That came in late yesterday afternoon around 6 o'clock. So I'm not sure if you all, Fish and Wildlife. Oh, that's right. Sorry, Fish and Wildlife. So that was presented in the packet you have today. For those online, did you all get those comments? They did not. They were sent out to folks on the interested parties list. Are you able to send those comments out to them, Sue, from over there? What's that? Oh, they did not go out. Okay, so they're in the packet that folks have here. So these were pretty robust comments. Are you able to put them, email them to folks, Sue, or no? So those will be sent to those of you online. So during the course of the meeting, you can review them, and anybody on the committee during the course of our discussions and deliberations can refer to them. All right.
I guess maybe one note is appropriate here. We haven't really, looking at their comments, I haven't read them, but just scanning them, they talk about the pygmy rabbit, and we really haven't discussed that. I didn't realize there were a petition for listing in January this year. And so that, and they say here, if I'm reading it correctly, that the lot site maybe better habitat for that. But I had reading it carefully before I said that. But it's something we might need to note. It's being important.
Hopefully folks online heard that, but yeah, so they spoke to habitat, wildlife impacts, habitat impacts. The item that was listed that had not been brought up in public comment or in the report, as we understand it, is the concern of the pygmy rabbit, and the service has received a petition to list the pygmy rabbit in early 2023. And I believe that's listed under Endangered Species Act. Yeah. So And in particular, the Roth site was an area of concern, I believe. Of greater concern. All right.
So what is gonna be our procedure on, I guess we're gonna get into the report later.
Yeah, 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 we're gonna revert, so as we go through this today, we just want to note where we're at on our process. So as we're moving into the SWAC discussion. Today we are the April meeting, we're looking for a recommendation of the finalist site to go to the Board of County Commissioners. If that is in fact achieved today, then the Board of County Commissioners will have a couple of public hearings on the issue before they make their final selection on the preferred site to acquire and permit and develop. So we're anticipating that will take into June for that process is complete. I did want to just comment again on what is the role of the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. So we've been meeting since I believe July of 2022, June or July of 2022. Committee members were asked to participate and solicited. And we have several members of the community at large, and the scope and focus of the role of the SWAC was to provide input on the screening and selection process, so the review of the criteria by which we were selecting the facility and the process that we were using. And based upon those criteria, the committee would participate in the evaluation of candidate sites and other aspects of the landfill siting effort, with ultimately the committee will make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners on the candidate site. So that's what we've been kind of on a winding road, taking almost 2 years, moving from approximately 203 or 204 potential areas of interest or potential down to these final 2 sites and hopefully the recommendation today. So we certainly want to, and we'll do so at the end, but want to thank this committee and all of the public input, the thousands of comments that we've received that have really helped move this process forward, propel us to the place that we're at today. And you know, this is really the beginning of what will now probably be another 5 years or more before we actually would potentially see a new landfill here in Deschutes County. So we'll give you our heartfelt thanks at the end, but
will this committee continue in some? I remember Chad saying that it's not just for the landfill, it may continue in some way afterwards.
There is under ordinance, there's a solid waste advisory committee. This one, it continues to be kind of reconstituted as we move through different steps. We are envisioning that we will actually develop another advisory committee, which would require reappointment or appointment to look at diversion components of the solid waste master plan. So we want to get into some updates that came that we went through and placed into a report based on the March meeting. So with that, I'll hand that over to you all.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so thank
You want to introduce yourself too?
Sure. Yeah, I'm Ryan Rudnick, paramedic, working with Dwight and leading the consultant team in this final site evaluation process. We received some comments from the SWAC after the March meeting. We had a time frame for receiving comments, which was March 29th. Hadn't received any written comments by that date, but did have comments jotted down from the March meeting that we started working into the report. We did receive a handful of late comments on April 6th, and were able to incorporate the vast majority of those, even though we had a very limited turnaround time with those before then updating the report and posting that to the webpage on April 8th. And so here's a brief summary of those. There's also a memo here that's included online and in this packet, summarizing in greater detail the updates that were made based on SWAC input. The high points are in the executive summary. We added discussion about public involvement and public concern for each site, the concern about potential disturbances to recreational activities and wildlife impact at the Rock B site, and also touched on the potential for sage grouse to be listed as an endangered species during the landfill lifespan. Also noted under the transportation section in the summary report that there may be the potential need for up to 5 water trucks per day running back and forth to the Rock B site to provide supplemental water supply during the summer months. The average is about 1 to 2 trucks, but during the summer months, it could be up to 5. For under community assessment, we included discussion on the county's outreach to the public and to regional tribes, and also included a summary table of the public comments received pertaining to each site. In the appendix, I think 4 appendices were updated in response to specific comments pertaining to those, with new data added, such as wind speed data for weather stations in closer proximity to the Moon Pit and Rock B sites. Wildfire risk data was reviewed and summarized in the relevant appendix for that. And also the greenhouse gas emission analysis incorporated into the air quality and weather subtask report. Also summarized in the summary report at a higher level. Also mentioned the risk of greenhouse gas, or not greenhouse, greater sage grouse listing within the landfill lifespan and the implications that could have operations after. And with cost estimates, this is a fairly significant change, I believe. We prepared an upper change or upper range for the Rock East cost estimate, accounting for the higher end of acquisition if it were to include all of the rock parcels offered for sale, which is roughly $7 million. So that upper limit is reflected in the acquisition cost range for Rock East, as well as the initial development cost has a higher cost range, assuming increased mitigation costs if the fee in lieu approach was taken to mitigating sage grouse. And so there's that range presented for the Rock East costs. But more significantly, we then approximated 30-year bond costs, extending the time frame and term for that bond that would finance the initial acquisition and development costs for either site, and apply that to both sites. And that was based on information and rate info provided by the county. And we then have had revised tipping fees as a result of that, like going from a 20-year mortgage to a 30-year, lower payment, essentially. And then also analyzed the effect that the tipping fee changes from the current would have to self-haul disposal costs and monthly residential franchise waste collection costs. So really trying to boil it down to lifespan level and what these costs would feel like, more or less. So next we'll go into just a summary of those. And here you can see the cost ranges reflected here in the table on the right. That's the change for Rock East acquisition cost ranges. And the cost per ton over the lifespan was not significantly affected by this. That's over the whole lifespan, doesn't account for bond financing, just taking the total costs incurred over the lifespan over the total tonnage, so that didn't change. And the small, couple million difference in the grand scheme of billions for the lifespan didn't change the cost per ton over the lifespan. But there were some pretty significant or notable changes. On the near-term cost for the 30-year tipping fee. As you may recall, Moon Pit was ranging from, it was near $120 per ton on the high range for the 30-year tipping fee. With the 30-year bond financing, instead of 20-year, that's now in the range of $106 to $115 per ton. And Rothy's now ranges from $100 to $102 per ton. So extending the term of the bond has improved affordability for both sides in the near term. Now, taking that further, we analyzed or estimated the impact that this would have to monthly residential collection bills. The tipping fee is a small portion of what franchisors charge customers. Much of the cost has to do with hauling, driving around town and picking up waste and taking it to the transfer station. So the tipping fee, the increase from where it is to what it would be for each site would represent a 12 to 15% change at Moon Pit and a 10 to 11% change at Rothy's, which amounts to $3 to $4 roughly for Moon Pit and $2.56 to $2.73. So between 2 and 3 for Rothy's. Very minimal change, or relatively minimal. Bringing monthly residential bills from $25 to say $28 or $29 for Moon Pit, or up to $28 roughly for Rothy's. Just to kind of put it into perspective in terms of what residential customers would see on their bill as a result of these two sites. Also, the self-haul disposal costs. This is when you load up your truck or trailer and go to Knott or Negus to drop off household waste or construction debris on your own. Currently, that's $14 for the first 400 pounds. It's properly covered and secured, and that's proportional to the tipping fee. A fifth of the tipping fee, to be exact. And so that has more of a direct relationship to change in the tipping fee. For Moon Pit, that would increase from 51 to 64%, from $14 where it is now up to 21 to 23. For Rothy's, we would have a smaller increase, roughly 43 to 46%, going from $14 now to approximately $20. So I hope that helps put into perspective the effect that some of these financing changes have on the near-term 30-year costs for bond financing and customer costs.
Would that bond have to go to the public for approval?
No, that wouldn't.
Can you elaborate, Tim, on why?
Yeah, so the question was, would that bond have to go to the public for a vote? No, that's the solid waste department runs as an enterprise fund, so this would be really financing for the development of that facility under that enterprise fund. So it's not like a library, for example, doesn't come from the general tax fund.
We've also provided a preliminary development schedule, which applies generally to both sites because there are similar. With the level of detail we have now, there's similar timeframes associated with both sites, from what we've studied and found. And so from here you can see acquisition beginning quarter 3 and 4 this calendar year, and potentially extending as far as 2027. It's anticipated that an option to purchase would be pursued up front, and then potentially full acquisition later. That's certainly subject to change based on the county's negotiations with property owners, but that's how that's been mapped out. Land use and permitting is anticipated to take up to 3 years, 3.5 years for both sites. And for Moon Pit, land use permitting would involve the SM zone text amendment to allow landfilling as a reclamation activity, and then it would then be followed by conditional use permit application process and the mitigation. For Rothy's, land use permitting, this involves the conditional use permitting and the farm impacts test, which would be subject to. So both of those are expected to be lengthy. In addition, in a parallel track, environmental and natural resources permitting for both sites is anticipated to take approximately the same time frame And for Moon Pit, that would involve a NEPA process. Requiring likely an environmental assessment or an EIS. To access the landfill site through BLM. Based on discussions with BLM, we've had several now. If an EI or an EA is triggered, it could take 2 to 3 years. If an EIS is triggered, it could take 3 to 5. There's the potential for a categorical exclusion to pass, but that seems unlikely and unsafe to assume.
Yeah.
That shorter route. For Roth East, environmental and natural resources permitting, the timeline here assumes a lengthy process for wildlife mitigation efforts, largely related to sage-grouse, but other species as well, as noted by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There are many species. And a lot of interest, as we've heard with this site. So it's not expected to be a quick path there either.
And just a quick question on that, on the mitigation at Roth. That 1.5 to 8 million, I think was bookmarked. Is that reflected in these numbers? Okay.
Yeah, the lower range is the lower end of that initial development cost, and then the roughly 8 million is the higher.
So this is worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Okay.
And open the question, but so that mitigation of wildlife on Roth, it still assumes you can do a fair amount of mitigation by adding the extra acres as well as the grazing. Again, something to do with the grazing allotment, grazing rights.
Yeah, there's a spectrum there presented for mitigation costs. Cheaper options would be some of the more creative on-site committee responsible mitigation options that have been explored in the report, or at the higher end, the easier but more costly option would be in lieu mitigation at the higher end, and that cost range may change, you know, if there are higher expectations of mitigation in response to comments.
So it might be higher than what's shown here.
Could be. These are comments we just got yesterday, right? Last night.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the comments we got from Fish and Wildlife are consistent with what we heard from Oregon Department of Wildlife at the last meeting in terms of, and even from the public comments, that the landscape, especially with sage-grouse, is changing substantially. It has the potential to change and evolve, and we saw that with the BLM report that came out right before the last meeting. So while I guess my point is that the numbers you have in here are sort of based on today's landscape, right? Sort of what's known today and the way things are defined, and the likelihood of those costs going up is relatively significant, I think. Going forward.
Yeah, we've captured some of that, but you're right. And the kind of the unknowns out there are probably more significant that could impact those costs. Yeah.
Especially over the medium term. A little bit longer than maybe the short term, the likelihood of those costs going up because of increasing attention in particular to sage-grouse.
And like I said, there might be disagreement on the grazing. It's something we can play in the future when it's actually.
Yeah, and that appendix presents several options for mitigation. Retirement of grazing allotments is presented as one, but isn't one that this report or approach is committed to. That's something that be pursued further, but it helped in providing a range of costs and options, mitigation, and I think collaboration with ONDA is quite likely, and other groups, you know, to work on, you know, favorable and creative mitigation approaches and whatnot. And so more would be developed based on the site that's selected. But that was presented as one option, and it has complications of its own, you know, regarding the transfer of the lease and validating, you know, those grazing with the new owner. So another point here, you can see kind of the stack of work. Sorry if the color coding is a little unclear. Yellow generally consultant services, gray is, you know, property acquisition work. Other, you know, darker colors are permitting related. green, blue, and then solid waste permit to draw out emphasis, and then red, construction, to really capture some attention. And we show that starting in 2028, and the potential for that to extend through 2030, given that will be starting later due to the land use and environmental permitting timeframes. That could be real. And then, but also have a little bit of pink shading there in 2027, recognizing the potential for Moon Pit to begin excavation as aggregate money before permits are issued or approved for landfill development. That would have to be worked out with, based on the county's ownership structure at that time and mining contractors and whatnot. But it's an active surface mine with the Dogami permit, and if that can be supported by the market to excavate that area, separate from the landfill activity, that might be an opportunity to get a head start. And then our last bit. Yeah.
I'm just curious, is there anything known about possible evolving things that are criteria, concerns that to be considered under a DEQ permit? That is it changing at all? Are they asking about greenhouse gas emission analyses any differently than they were, or is there anything else going on?
It's a good question. The piece is really around the Title V permits, air quality issues, methane management, methane capture, methane monitoring. Those are the larger elements that have been changing over the last couple of years, and it really is around how you monitor, control, and destroy methane. I think we may start to see other areas that may fall under DEQ around food waste and food waste management and landfill avoidance, but not things that would impact necessarily landfill siting.
Yeah, and landfill permitting is pretty straightforward as far as what is in the rules now and what they look like going forward. And
yeah,
really, Clean Air Oregon and the air rules are primary. We're primarily seeing changes these days, and not as well as any future facility.
Yeah, good question. Thanks. And then we just one last slide, and then we'll open it all up to SWAC discussion. And this is all SWAC discussion, so feel free to bust in if you have a question. Dwight, you want to take this part?
Yeah, just kind of wanted to go through some of the SWAC questions that had come through. And one of them was, will all the public comments and meeting notes also be added as appendices? And they are, that's the public record. And so keeping those in there, as well as the deliberation records of these meetings, that's specific to the minutes of the meetings, and then other, your comments directly as SWAC members as well. And so that is included in the final documentation.
I do have a question on that though.
Yeah.
By all public comments, I mean, there are thousands of emails, perhaps hundreds at least.
And I guess that's when I say public record, is it all part of the public record? Is it part of the appendices? I think most of those public comments will be noted in the summary tables that we've had. So what are the topics of interest that people have had on different sites? And that really started back in when we were doing the broad and focused screening, because we had comments, a lot of comments at that point. And that's when we got the large volume of comments on those. And so that is more of the part of the public record. The summary will be in the actual appendix to the report. But again, these are all public comments, and so they are part of the public record that is available.
So when you click on appendices and, in the future, it's not going to necessarily list thousands of comments.
No, although in fact, that's a good question, exactly how best to identify those within the links in the document, and we can see what works.
Yeah, Sue, maybe you have might have recollection of how were public comments appendicized or not in the solid waste management planning process. They were kept on file, but yeah. So, yeah, the summary tables would be appendicized unless you want to,
There might be, we might want to include the full comment made by an official state or federal agency or tribes.
Oh, yes.
Agency letter.
Yeah.
okay.
Like, these, that one from the Fish and Wildlife. I don't know if ODFW submitted one or Andrew Walsh just did a oral testimony. That was it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, and the tribes apparently haven't responded to anything, but if they do.
Mhm.
And if we were to consider, the start of this process, kind of threshold for comments, that would narrow down the quantity of actual written comments
Yeah,
to include in.
yeah, true.
Would it be appropriate to include meeting minutes in the appendix of the report as a summary of the process?
Usually not.
Okay.
Again, it would be available.
Mhm.
It's already 1,300 pages.
Yeah. Is the SWAC also approving appendices? I think the point we do want to get across here is that the report and the all the appendices, it's a 1,300 page, compilation of all this information, is a decision-making tool, not necessarily to be approved. The item to be approved is the recommendation going forward. And so I wouldn't say you necessarily have to approve the appendices, so to speak. It's more that you are approving and making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners.
I don't know about other SWAC members, but I did have time where some cases the background to read all those appendices.
Well, no, exactly, exactly. And that's how we typically prepare these reports as the experts preparing this information for use by decision makers like yourselves, and in this case, making that recommendation onto the board. And then the third item here, did BLM confirm that obtaining a road right of way to Moon Pit will be a lengthy process? Yes, they did. And it is kind of nuanced through, there is a road right of way now. And, for the current operation and the current property owner. And so there's reassignment of that. So it is a process that you go through. It's not whether, necessarily obtaining a right of way. It's kind of this process of transitioning that right of way to the county in this case.
Yeah, and I would just add, it's also concurrent. It's not, you have to do that first. It's concurrent with all the other activities that we're gonna have to be doing relative to land use and DEQ permits, et cetera.
Yeah, you saw in the schedule, those are in parallel, land use and environmental review. The bond question already got answered by Tim. So should various population growth assumptions be explored and modeled for landfill waste projections? What we're primarily here for is differentiating between two sites. This is actually kind of a larger subject for solid waste planning within the county. Not really that relevant to the question of which site is the appropriate site or the preferred site for a landfill. So we did not go through exhaustive, analysis, of growth assumptions. And we went with those assumptions that were best supported by state population, by county projections for solid waste generation, and by county projections and, pushed by DEQ for recycling and organics removal and so forth and diversions. So that's what we used. So we felt that it was a very consistent number that we were using through this process and appropriate for looking at these two sites.
I think maybe you wouldn't say something. It's actually you that Mike made a comment a couple meetings back that maybe look at a sort of, what do you call it, a sensitivity analysis to see if those comparisons of the two sites would drastically change if you adopted a really different growth, population increase. Was that what you asked?
Well, I think there might have been somebody else who made that
Oh.
comment, but from the public. I mean, do you
Oh.
want to review the population growth assumptions that are in here now, just a summary level? Because my recollection is that, I mean, it's a more than 1% for some period of time, and then at a certain period of time, it's modeled at 1% growth going forward, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and I believe it's at 1.5%, for the initial period, but you have that.
first, like 10 years or something.
Not sure if it's in here, it might be summarized in the cost analysis. Yeah. But it's based on the Deschutes County Coordinated Population Forecast. And it, that has a limited time frame, but it terminates, it drops down to a terminal 1.1% growth rate, starting at maybe 2.2 or so now, and then gradually declining, and then leveling out at a flat growth rate. So it does seem to recognize, some capacity being reached in terms of resources and whatnot, land availability. Here in recognizing that declining growth rate, and that's based on PSU Population Research Center for the county. And so we ran with that and assumed that 1.1% would continue.
Yeah.
To do anything different would be, I feel like, a bit of a calculation or speculation. We assume it would go down or go up. So we just kept with that, kind of where it landed.
I think what I was thinking of is if you had a band say, what if it only went up 0.5% after a while, or if it only went up 2%? Does it sway the decision or recommendation at all?
And, I guess part of it is professional judgment, having done this for 38 years and looked at past projects where we've done this process and gone through those population projections and how that impacted, operations and this is obviously post selection in those cases, of the site, and not really seeing that much of a difference. But what's most critical is that I'm sorry. Is that you're evaluating based upon a consistent model for both sites. And so you're not playing games as far as trying to push one side or the other. And so that we went with pretty much the middle of the road, consistent numbers for both sides, and that it was primarily for the purposes of site life. Were we going to have enough site life, and then also for the population or for the projections of waste, and costs. One of the reasons why we decided to put more emphasis and really look at this 30-year time frame is for bonding, but it's also, if that's what's most impactful, and where you're going to see the biggest difference, it's also where the population projections are best. I mean, the farther you go out with population projections, the farther you can get off straight. And so it's really good to be able to have this kind of nearer term projection period that you're using for the purpose. And so from that standpoint, those are pretty solid numbers, for comparing the two sites.
And the effect that different projections would have, or different actual growth relative to what's projected, would be the lifespan, as Dwight noted, the usage of airspace over time, and the need for more or less cell development at different intervals. Also, the cost per ton, that's the denominator in that equation, the tonnage. So the total tonnage to that point. So if waste projection slows down, then cost per ton would go up for that period. If that makes sense. If there's more waste produced, then we're dividing by a larger total cumulative tonnage with a lower cost. So those are that's kind of the gist of the relationship between growth and other factors.
Anything else on that?
I was just curious to see if you guys factored in the diversion rates. You know, Tim is at 33% now, and he's looking to go to 45 in 2025. If that factored into your design capacity analysis.
Yeah, it is designed that we get up to 45%. It won't be as soon as the opening of this landfill. I think that the 45% is hit sometime around between 2030 and 2040.
Yes.
But it is the 45% diversion is built into this.
1% per year.
Yeah.
Steady progress.
Yeah, we're trying to be very conservative on that. We better beat it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next up was, at Moon Pit, who would own the aggregate rock, being mined? So the county is acquiring in this case, would acquire the pit and the mineral rights. And so the county would own the rock. And so it's up to them how that is mined, and, royalties, or however, whatever, approach is used, to get the economic benefit for the county out of that rock. And the final item under this was, is water leasing at Moon Pit secure and included in cost estimates? It is included in the cost estimates. We have the costs in there. And so that is one of the line item costs, similar to how at Roth, we have it for the trucking of water out to the site, in that case, both of which looking to secure water rights, in that case. And so whether, the leasing is secure, that would be part of the acquisition of the property, would be to contractually secure those rights for that period of time, that they need to have access to those until they get secure water rights. So it's all, as they say, it's all negotiable. And that holds true to Roth as well. So Roth, in that case, I mean, we're looking at hauling water out there until we secure that water right. And so, yes, I mean, I'm trying to remember, did we have a period of time in which we're hauling water out there, or did we just
It was conservatively the same with the whole thing.
Yeah, fine.
It's a small portion of the overall annual operating cost, around 1% of it. So conservatively it was we put in for all years. Yeah. But it would likely have a sunset if water rights could be obtained.
Yeah.
Right?
So we would purchase domestic water rights, but then we'd be looking for.
Yeah, but worst case scenario, it's 1% of the total cost. Roughly. Yeah.
See it in the appendix. Yeah.
Can you clarify, does that
Trucking or owning water rights?
Trucking.
Trucking, yes.
But water rights have also been counted as a part of the initial development cost for water system, which you'll see that cost broken down further in the water appendix. I think it's G. One of those. Yeah. So in a sense, it kind of is double counted, but it may occur at different times. The timing of that.
Somebody online was wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, can you clarify? So that well at the Moon Pit, it doesn't have a water right attached to it?
At Moon Pit, it does have a water right. Under the proposed sale agreement, is that right would not be for sale, that they would look to transfer that water right. So they would lease a portion of that right or sell water to the county until such time that the county was able to secure its other water rights.
Does the county have any existing water rights that they could
negotiations as to
transfer?
that would need to be an indefinite offer until such time as the county was able to procure its own water rights.
Does the county have any existing water rights that they could transfer out there?
It's got some water rights, whether they could transfer or not is, we are not sure. It's in another district, water district. But that we would look at the purchase of mitigation credits and other water rights as well.
And Tim, this is Keith. Correct me if I'm wrong, but transferring water rate or water rights is less timely than for them to try to sell them to the county. Is that correct? The process when you transfer versus sell?
Well, transferring is generally a more expedient process than applying for a new groundwater permit.
Right. Okay. I thought so.
You already recently.
Mhm.
Yep. They recommended pursuing a transfer, and also applying for a new permit, see what works, more or less.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, it is possible to lease part of a water right.
Yep.
And that's what we're looking at doing, and that's what we have costed.
Yep.
Right.
Yep, both sides have a near-term water supply. Water supply, near-term and a long-term pathway.
I think that's important, that lease, how long that can be in effect for, how long they're willing to lease there, because procuring water rights in the Deschutes Basin, and this is definitely on the east end of the Deschutes Basin, especially with the new rulemaking with water resources, could be a significant challenge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I guess when you say near-term water leasing, how much of a commitment or how long of a commitment did he get from Hooker Creek?
In the solicitation letter, it was up to and until the county could procure its own rights. So I'm reading that it's indefinite. Until such time as the county is to procure them, so that could go 100 years.
We're done with that section. I had a couple of things that fit in the comment question realm. But at the end of this thing, but if I could ask quickly. Oh, go
I'm
ahead.
just asking an informational question. So these other, in here, we have the meeting minute suggestions and other suggestions from Robin, but then there's this other stuff in that I'm not quite clear where this is coming from and already in the draft report, or these are additional changes we're being asked to make today from you or
From me.
Yeah,
this
so-
whole- this whole packet.
Yes.
The red is just my suggested changes. The black is what's already there. But in the question realm, I think we should document if Moon Pit has a sage grouse, has any sightings of sage grouse from ODFW. I'm not aware of any. Could be listed as, low density habitat or something, but I'm not aware of any, it being seen there. And then, but based on the Fish and Wildlife Service, I guess we'll talk about what to do with the report. We've got to do something about the pygmy rabbit. It's gonna need its own section like the sage grouse. And one other thing, generally, I don't know if we should list the location of a nest or an archaeological site in the report. I know that federal agencies often shy away from that because then you don't know who's gonna get hold of that report and go out there and do some to the nest or try and loot this, do some of the site. And just like, I don't know what the county's policy is on that, but it might be wise not to be too specific.
So, yeah,
Our Cultural Resources League agrees with that generalization, and you can make some text edits to generalize the location, so it's not as easy to discover.
yeah, and we do have, it is actually a redacted report that's in there. Well, their discipline report.
Right, so, but what you're referring to is
Like the golden eagle nest.
Oh,
You might not say exactly where it is. And you might not want to. Talk about that site which I think is really not adjacent, but a little bit downstream from Moon Pit. Because somebody could go in there. I mean, it's pretty well known, but you never know who's gonna read the stuff. guess the rest of it, I guess, Tim, when you. How we're gonna deal with the report with suggested edits, I guess probably the two things I had in here, Mike, is follow through, most of it's editorial. But I guess the two items. I think the fire stuff is still a misstatement.
Yeah, before before you jump into it, so we've received some suggested modifications to the or suggested edits to the final report from SWAC member Robin Vora. They came in yesterday. Sue, those were sent out to the SWAC members, correct? And interested parties? Yeah. So that's what's in front of you. It's pertinent for the SWAC discussion. The question would be, would these, how would these be incorporated into the report? Probably the approach we would take is, because these are technical reports, the question would be whether they would be agreed to by the technical consultants, or whether we should accept them as SWAC. Would they be SWAC amendments or a SWAC discussion appendices?
I'd say
Approved.
discussion appendices,
Yeah.
so they're part of the deliberation of the SWAC.
Yeah.
It's kind of the idea, because we haven't had a chance to fully vet, everything here yet. But, some good information, and want to make sure that as appropriate, it is incorporated into the report, but not sure what we can at this point.
Is that the way the rest of the committee feels? Yes, I'd like to see some of the stuff actually get in the report, kind of leaving it open-ended that at least this committee won't know what finally be in there.
I think if the committee were to say, yes, we want these comments to be recognized, then they could be incorporated into the report where the technical authors approve those to be put in. Those not put in would still be a SWAC deliberative appendices to the report.
So would it be helpful at this point to kind of just brief, if I can, quickly just explain? There's only two that really.
Sure.
Most are editorial. Okay, I'm starting on.
Into the microphone.
Yes.
I don't think anybody can hear.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm starting on a lot of what I wanted to do was get some stuff that's buried somewhere in the appendix or somewhere into the executive summary, because that's all some people might read, or the conclusion. I know I often have this, if I have a long report, I go to those two sections. I may not read the rest of it. And so right in the first one, second to last paragraph, where we talk about concerns of local residents, a couple here in the audience. I was going to suggest adding paragliding and dust devils since they've been mentioned. And other one is poses impacts to map essential habitat for mule deer. Maybe cite where you got that. It's mapped by who? ODFW or and that actual use of those species. I suggest adding that is actually low in. That's why I made the comment about the sage grouse. Has anybody ever seen a sage grouse in Moon Pit?
Our natural resource lead reviewed that comment, and his response was pronghorn and sage grouse use at Moon Pit is low. Elk and deer signs were observed throughout Moon Pit.
Okay.
So it's not completely fair to say that actually use by all those species is low in Moon Pit.
Okay.
So he has some suggested language changes that accounts for that.
Okay. Good. That would be good then. Let's see. And then where you have the paragraph above, what I wrote, that I don't have any edits to it, but the reason I put that in there was how the wildlife mitigation question, which we talked about a little bit, was calculated. That one needs to now have mule deer, elk, pronghorn, sage grouse, and pygmy rabbit added. Then I had some edits on the decision. 1-2 second paragraph. But this one right here.
Okay.
I guess wherever you you have sage grouse in a lot of places, you may have to add pygmy rabbit to that list.
I'm just curious a little bit on that point. I'm not a natural resources lead, but my understanding is that each of these species is tied to the overlay zones for the county. And so what would be besides, I guess, the emphasis added by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and other groups, the trigger for that as a part of the permitting process?
I don't know the processing answer to that, but but you'll have to go through, since this petition for listing, you'll have to go through the Fish and Wildlife Service on sage grouse and pygmy rabbit, golden eagle, bald eagle, but not, not pronghorn and mule deer, but
So is the status as petition for listing? Is that?
I don't know. You ought to get that directly from the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yeah, so I think how we can work this is now that we have the wildlife letter. We'll review that, vet that, and how to bring that into the report, both the discipline report as well as back into the summary report and executive summary. Which in this case, it has pygmy rabbit in there, so that will be one of the items, so.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then on that kind of final paragraph in there, one of the final ones about the advantages and disadvantages. I suggested and read several things be added to it that you have elsewhere, but to put it in here, because that paragraph is probably the key paragraph that people might read. Insufficient present water rights, added cost of greenhouse gas emissions. And a general statement I made at the last meeting that mining in Moon Pit, from a cumulative effects analysis over time, if you looked at NEPA, mining in Moon Pit will continue whether or not there's a landfill, and impacts from that on wildlife and other resources will continue to happen. The Roth East side, if it's not used as a landfill, is less likely to have significant additional, impacts on wildlife over time. Just because that to me is an important point.
I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, I mean, Moon Pit is a disturbed state, and that's kind of the result of a lot of our studies.
Okay.
So far.
Okay.
Would you like responses to some of these?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Based on the consultant team's review.
But they were fast.
Yeah, so insufficient present water rights, that's the case with both sites. So
Okay.
listing that under Roth East
Okay.
would be appropriate. The added cost of greenhouse gas emissions from falling water, that's already captured later in that list regarding longer haul routes.
Okay, but
that'd be redundant.
Yeah, well, it says haul routes, but I'd also point out specifically the greenhouse gas emissions from the water, but okay.
Oh, that's mentioned.
Yeah, resulting in higher cost and related greenhouse gas.
Okay.
The water hauling is a very small portion of
Yeah.
the
Okay.
haul.
Yeah, I saw that. I was just tying that specifically to the water hauling to point that out.
Higher wildfire risk, the data we reviewed from U.S. Fish or
Yeah.
Forest Service, map both sites as high risk.
Yeah, I'd like to get to that next.
Right. So, and then just in general, with this conclusion, we've been very careful throughout this whole report, to approach this as objectively as possible with a high standard of objectivity. And so want to be cautious to skew it in one direction versus the other. We want to, as fairly as possible, present, the pros and cons of each site and kind of leave it up to the SWAC. And that's really what this exact moment is for you as a SWAC to discuss what you think, more so than wordsmithing it into the report, which aims to be an objective presentation of the pros and cons.
So let me just ask a question. Are you saying these last two sentences he's suggesting are not objective? Is that what you're saying about the mining at Moon Pit will continue?
I mean, it's a true statement. I guess we kind of wanted to leave it more as an open presentation of here's the pros and cons of this site.
I guess my point is though, to Robin's earlier point, that if people only read certain parts of the report, we don't want to give people the impression that an ongoing sort of commercial activity of some kind is only going to occur in a landfill scenario, which is not true. Objectively, it's false. It's correct to say there will be ongoing commercial activity. Just in terms of getting to a summary of that issue, this does actually seem to me an important point to be making about the facts on the ground.
I would add, it feels like a pro and a con, to just list like that one site will have continued use and one won't.
Right,
So
right, yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe it can be
I think the way it's written feels a little bit editorialized from a committee perspective. There may be a way to rewrite it. That's a little bit, that's kind of getting the fact across without it being.
Yeah.
Cause I agree with what you're saying about, just thinking about what should be just really straightforward information versus drawing conclusions about, what that information means, which I think is more of a SWAC discussion. So I want to be sensitive to that.
That'd probably be the second sentence. First sentence is pretty straightforward, yeah.
I had a question kind of related to that, which maybe should have asked a while ago, but I do think with the Roth East site, we kind of assume like it'll be a landfill or it'll be as it is today, but because it is it's private land. So I have been kind of curious about like, are there if it's not a landfill, are there other potential uses of that land, ways it could be developed in the future? And I don't know who that is a question for. I don't know if we would know that here, if that's,
I think I can take one stab at it. It has been, I don't know if it's been partitioned. It has been submitted for partition to be broken up into 8 parcels, I believe. So that it could then be sold into 8 separate parcels for residential or zoned under EFU.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's something that I just kind of came to the realization in the last month or so, thinking that we're operating, some of the discussion that we have is kind of saying like, oh, it'll be how it is. But when something is privately owned, there's no guarantee that it's going to stay exactly the way it is. So I think that's just something for us to consider.
Would edit that second sentence to include that 8 parcels.
Yeah.
That would.
Yeah, and we can talk, we can
That might
figure out exactly what that partition plan was.
And I think that's kind of where, when I was reading these edits, it triggered that for me, that it's like, I don't know how much we can say is factual. We know that if Roth East site is, if not used for a landfill, we don't actually know what the future land use could be. So anyway.
That's a great point. Further to the east, you have a shooting range.
Yeah.
Trap shooting, and you have accepted your received facility. So,
Okay. If nothing else, delete the second sentence. Yeah.
Just one more point on that real quick.
Oh.
Another intent in this closing paragraph is to kind of emphasize that this decision is very nuanced and there's a lot of different factors at play, and advantages, challenges, costs, a lot of different disciplinary considerations. And so we present a list of those, kind of the broad spectrum of pros and cons at Moon Pit, and then a broad spectrum of pros and cons at Roth East. And then to narrow in on one category here at the end, just structurally, maybe feels a little bit out of place. If there's a way that we can generalize that more so, in terms of site disturbance, perhaps, but it seems to focus narrowly on habitat impacts, which is one of many factors at play. So I just wanted to comment on kind of the structural intent of that closing paragraph of the executive summary. And there's a place where that belongs, like in the natural resources section.
I was just trying to bring, to me, it was an important point that I was trying to bring it out in the comparing paragraph 2, but you want to continue? The wildfire was one that I guess, I'm not sure where you got your wildlife risk data. It's just at a reference. He's saying that they're both the same probability. Because the person that is really the guru on sagebrush ecology in this area and the fire ecology, is Rick Miller. He's a retired from OSU professor. He studied this his whole career. And I also talked to a couple other people. The soils in the Badlands, the Moon Pit site, don't, promote lush vegetation growth. The soils up at Roth East are a little more productive. There's also more invasives with cheatgrass. And so when you have more vegetation, more cheatgrass, going to have more fire. And I've been to, a number of talks on this topic, and I just pulled up, quickly just pulled up a couple of citations for you to look at. That the fire risk, for at least everything I've heard, differs between the sites. I've heard ecologists give talks saying that there's never been a big fire in the Badlands. That's why the trees are there, they're old. versus other, otherwise it's invasive juniper up at the Roth site, which suggests that fire kept it out until we started suppressing fire. And so I think that statement you have up there about being equal risk is an error, but I guess I don't know how we can correct it as a committee, but I urge you to look into those publications and see if you come to a different conclusion.
The Forest Service map on both is high.
Yeah, yeah, those Forest Service maps and the ODFW maps, I mean, ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry maps are big, broad things that go across huge scales. I mean, the current Department of Forestry one is really controversial because it shows a lot of areas and a lot of people having their insurance rates raised and everything else because it just lumps a lot of places together. They're mapped by people, sitting with GIS and so forth, not necessarily people on the ground doing field ecology work. And I used to work for the Forest Service. I mean, I know how some of those maps are made. But I'd encourage you to, and you can even talk to Rick Miller. He'll answer the phone in Corvallis. He's retired. And see what he says on that. But
yeah, I guess I spoke with our subtask lead on this point, and there just wasn't enough time to fully investigate all these sources to say whether this is appropriate to incorporate as is now. From the data we've seen, in addition to the layer for burn probability, there's fire incident mapping, and there were more incidents in the Badlands from lightning. But there's a higher flame height potential at Roth East. So they kind of have different fire risk factors at play there.
that's what Rick Miller says. You're going to have single trees going up, and I've seen them out there walking around. We all have. That lightning hits a tree and burns a quarter acre or something, but you're not going to get a fire that would affect the landfill operations.
If you could speak to just how, like the fire protection measures that would be in place at the landfill and how it would function really at either site and how it would interact with any potential wildfire.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you get with landfills is essentially their fire breaks. Because the way that they're operated and, the full function of them with access roads, actually acting as a fire break. So, rarely do the landfills themselves either generate a fire going offsite, or are they impacted by a fire coming on? And that's just because their operations, the way they are, we have abundant water, that's part of the reason why we want water out there is for fire protection as part of it. We also have a lot of soil that we can use for that purpose. And so as from a differentiation standpoint, again, between two sites, I don't know if it really makes a difference between the two.
Yeah.
So that's really kind of the main point.
Yeah.
That's largely what we're trying to do here is differentiate sites for the purposes of selection.
Right.
But what I hear you, Robin, and I think we should refer it to the technical folks to see if they want to put a little more detail on the differentiation of the type of fires.
I didn't suggest taking out what you had, but I suggested having that addition in there.
Yeah, and I think it's great. I think it is very good to look at it further. Unfortunately, we didn't have time,
I guess maybe a couple of things briefly on what you just said. If you look at a satellite in an old photos of Pine Mountain, there are no trees on that north side. Those all came in with fire suppression. So that means wildfire regularly hit Pine Mountain and burned through there. And if you get into, what you're saying is true, if you're in up to say a 97 percentile fire, meaning 97% of the fires will probably not affect the landfill, but almost all damage or things that, you can't control when wildfire happen by those 1 or 2% fires, million acre fires. The Long Draw fire, for example, in Malheur County, it was spotting 2-3 miles ahead. A grass range fire, the biggest in last 100 years in Oregon. And a fire like that coming down Pine Mountain, you get a 30-mile-an-hour wind, you get a fire like that. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, there's none of that mitigation, and either one of these sites will do anything. It'll burn right through there. And you have whole towns, like, you know, you can see in California there, that have all kinds of barriers in them that it burn right through everything, fuel breaks no matter what.
No, I mean, I agree if it is such a fire. I think what we can note is what is happening on the site for fire mitigation as well as fire suppression. And, you know, because I think for the most part, given what landfills are and, you know, how they are, you know, revegetated and the like, that it's not going to be a significant threat either way, you know, to the landfill or the landfill threat to others.
I think your suggestion is a good one. Let's go ahead on that particular section and you got to work on it.
Yeah, oh yeah, and great citations here, you know, that we'll review.
And there are probably more. I mean, I didn't have time to research that. On the natural resources section, like we mentioned, adding a section on pygmy rabbit. And I just had, it's not just ravens, but other avian predators will also be attracted. Just acknowledge that. The ravens would be the primary, but just to let, there'll be other ones
I
there.
think generally for those, we can include the broader mention of other avian predators, but our natural resources lead did intentionally focus on ravens as the key predator for sage-grouse, and that's what most of the cited studies are pertaining to. So there is kind of a broader acknowledgement that there's other predators, but also a more of a focus on ravens as well.
Yeah, like we had an early comment, was it from Stu Garrett or something right in the beginning? Of a study, bald eagles coming 50 miles and some to a landfill. To, you know, and they would prey on it. And I don't know about those avian predators on pygmy rabbits. Because they might do a take on them too. But that's something I don't know much about, but when you write the pygmy rabbit section, you might look into. And then on big game habitat, what I've said before is that because of disturbance, and if you know, just the level of trucks coming in and all that, it's not necessarily completely, unless it's quite a ways away from the landfill, it's not going to be, you know, complete mitigation for mule deer, elk, pronghorn, because they're also affected by wildlife disturbance. And then the thing on sage grouse is the same thing with avian predators and the disturbance. And then I had that same sentence that we talked about earlier about mining will continue on good. And you can delete the second sentence if you think it's not objective about the Rockies side.
That might be a good place for that to be captured is in the natural resource perspective.
Yeah, but again, I was trying to bring also these points, at least to me, that were important also in the out in front. And I thought we ought to mention that there's been no response from the tribe so far.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And like I said, I think that cultural site is nearby, but not immediately adjacent, but they maybe it's bigger than I realize and it comes to it. I haven't seen the archaeology report.
Good point.
Let's see. Oh, the cost analysis, including for water, just a little bit. And in the conclusion, again, I added some of the same things I had in the executive summary. There were, at least I thought were important points we've already talked about. That helps.
I guess the question would be, would you be, based on what you heard, would you be comfortable with the parametrics working with their technical folks to amend the sections as they deem appropriate based on your input? Or is there another action you want this committee to take?
You had a little different wording the first time when you mentioned it. How did you say that? If the committee, I guess that'd be one option. The other option is the committee recommends that needs to be incorporated, not exactly word for word, but in some way in the report.
It would be included as if the SWAC as a whole wants to vote and say that your comments would be accepted as whole, as part of the SWAC deliberative, the comments, and it would be within the appendix as such.
That's like two different things. You could do both.
Yeah, well, some of these will be incorporated into the report. I can't tell you that in total, that all of them will. I can't tell you that.
You know, my perspective, I should let the other committee's members voice an opinion, what they think should be done.
Well, one other thing I would note is your method of recommendation can be a motion. And you can have a rather lengthy motion stating your reasoning for your recommendation. I mean, we've provided, the substance here objectively to you, with the intent that you can make a decision with it. And it sounds like there's been a lot of deliberation here, a lot of consideration. And so this is kind of your chance to, okay, based upon the findings, this is our recommendation, and this is why.
And I'd like to open, have other SWAC members may ask questions or make comments, so that some of those may also get included either in the motion or in a motion for deliberation notes.
I have one question. Could you speak a little bit to like what the direct outreach to tribal entities has looked like? Because it says direct outreach, and I guess the way that I think about direct outreach is like a conversation, and so I'm interested in how like no response could have been given. Was it like an email that was sent, and which tribes was outreach sent to?
Yeah, Aubrey, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, so this is Aubrey Canning, I'm part of the consultant team, and from the communications perspective, we did send written letters at multiple points during the siting process to, I believe it was 3 contacts for the tribes. This is prior to my being in kind of the lead on the communication side, so I don't have kind of firsthand knowledge of that process, but there were written outreach and then I believe follow up by phone as well, without a response yet. But we're still interested in opening that dialogue and getting that consultation.
It also says like throughout the report that the county has been doing the outreach, and so what I'm hearing is that Parametrics has been doing it. Cool.
Yeah, I'm under our agreement.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good to make more efforts to have a conversation. Just calling that out.
Yeah, and it's a good point, and we have actually made more approaches to do that, and to get other contacts that we can use for that purpose.
Great, thank you.
In terms of Robin's suggested amendments to the report, I mean, I support the discussion that we had earlier on the executive summary, understanding that second sentence, especially this last paragraph, is maybe getting to be more, more of a judgmental conclusion, if you will, rather than stating the facts. But the rest of this stuff, I think, is kind of needs to be left to the experts, because that's essentially, I mean, I understand there's disagreements about some of this stuff, and I think the wildfire thing is something you guys could look into and see what your folks on your team are looking at. But the rest of this stuff, it's really up to the judgment of the team whether that makes sense to incorporate into the report. But I do think that the stuff in the executive summary is important to just make sure we get the full picture painted for people, because people are generally going to look at that and the conclusion section, at least to start with. But yeah, I'm not sure if I'm seeing head nods from the rest of the committee about that. It seems like those in the room, we're seeing head nods. I'm assuming that's the case for those online.
Yeah, I'm fine with that approach, Mike.
That's correct.
I would agree as well. This is Keith.
This is Ed. I agree.
So these comments will be referred to the technical
Yeah, and encouraging that, the part about, what will happen at Moon Pit, regardless of whether there's a landfill or not out there, that somehow gets reflected.
Yeah, so what I heard more generally is, a section will be added on Pygmy Rabbit. The wildfire risk section will get further evaluation. Take another look at that in more detail. And you'll delete the sentence on the future of the Roth site of the landfill. And the other comments, which are more editorial, well, I don't know what words you would use for those. They would,
Kind of left to the technical team to look at what they think the right response is, if they're appropriate to include or not.
Yeah, and
Based on
and
their-
other avian predators will be also assessed.
yeah, I personally would like to see those other ones.
Yeah.
Just voted for approval by sense of committee is not ready.
So do we want to move on to, I'm not sure how we want to handle this in terms of the vote on which of the two sites we want to move forward, if there's consensus about something, or if we're going to have a vote and have a split decision of some kind. Do you want to go around the table and have people kind of weigh in kind of what they're thinking to start with?
I think that might be appropriate if people are willing to do so, to say where you're leaning, and that way we could probably get the appropriate first motion.
Should I start, or do you want to start, Chris? Look, you're leaning in there.
I'm happy to start. I'm leaning towards Moon Pit.
Do you want to give a summary of why?
I think just given the conversations we've had over the past 2 months, that the site is an active gravel mine, that already has, implications for wildlife in that area. I think, Cassie's comments about, we don't know what the future of the Roth East site will have. I get that. I also think it's unlikely that it'll be a big mine. So I think just the industrial site for me is the reason why I'm leaning that way.
I think similarly, I'm leaning towards Moon Pit. I think for similar reasons, the city of Bend has explicit council goals around greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So that's definitely an important factor for us. It's just kind of that distance traveled. And similarly, that the city council has kind of always had versions of council goals focused on just stewarding the natural environment and protecting our environment. And so for a lot of the discussion we've had about Moon Pit being an already disturbed site versus an undisturbed site, with the caveat that we don't know for sure, but we do know that Moon Pit is disturbed today. So, and I think a lot of the comments that we hear from the, from ONDA and U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife are all kind of, I think that's kind of the root cause of a lot of the different factors that come out of that, is that the impacts to wildlife and other environmental impacts are just less when it's a disturbed site. So I feel like we've heard that consistently enough. And that kind of being a longstanding value for the city.
Yeah, I would have to agree as well, for all the reasons that's been mentioned. I like the Roth Pit, or the Roth East site from a financial standpoint. I'm concerned about the habitat and how that will be handled, and the delay of those processes as well. I'm not super excited about citing landfill in a current mining application, but it might be the way to go.
I actually made a list of pros and cons, but as I mentioned before, to me, but these are both poor sites. I wish we hadn't let go of some of those other sites as quickly as we did, but given we have to choose between these two as a committee, I also favor the Moon Pit site. I don't know if it helps. I could rattle through my pros and cons of how I got there, but you probably heard it all. Advantages of the Moon Pit are existing mining, less infrastructure, existing disturbance, aggregate resource extraction to subsidize land use operations. The disadvantages is next to the Badland wilderness, more expensive, and in the beginning, complex site layout, BLM road use permit, more blasting for excavation, Golden Eagle nest, water rights, leased, not owned. On Roth East, the advantages were good site layout, connection to electric power. The disadvantages, strong on the wildlife end, especially sage grouse, now pygmy rabbit, deer, elk, pronghorn, higher wildlife mitigation costs. I think the wildfire potential is higher. It would affect more local residents, affect recreation users, visual screening, Pine Mountain Observatory, paragliding. The water rights is not secured, their availability, water hauling. The dust devils and wind, higher greenhouse gas emissions, longer haul, the Milliken grade. LUMA permitting, land use change from exclusive farm use, and potential for Fish and Wildlife Service, federal listing of sage grouse and pygmy rabbit. So that list, I guess it's bad to make a recommendation based on negatives rather than positives, but if we have to choose between the two sites, I think Roth East has more negatives, and so that's why I would go with Moon Pit.
I'm supportive of the Moon Pit site as well for the reasons that everybody's shared. Primarily that it's an already disturbed site, and it's, I think, going to have less impacts overall on wildlife. And I think, although we haven't had any real input from the tribes, it appears from the data we do have that it'll have the lowest or least amount of impact on cultural resources, again, primarily because it's already disturbed. The lower greenhouse gas emissions, of course, is an important part of this, and I think an important part of why I prefer Moon Pit. And then I also, roughly the lifetime costs are similar for both sites, and I think that that's important for us to consider. This is a 50+ year decision. It's not even just a 30-year decision, and so we need to look at that kind of time frame. I do want to, again, as Chris said, just express the concern about lack of coordination so far with the tribes, and I think we should continue that. I think that should be part of our recommendation to the county commissioners, is that there should be continued efforts to do outreach to the tribes, and also that I know this is not really the purview of this committee, but wanting to see an equal level of attention to planning for waste prevention and recovery in the future, that's really important part of the story here. It's not what's before us today, but just sort of making that part of our recommendation as well. It could extend the life of this new landfill, which is better for the community and just less impacts overall. I think the final thing, and maybe we come back to this as a second piece of this, I'd like to discuss a little bit more ONDA's proposal on a comprehensive and robust wildlife and recreation impact plan. So maybe we come back to that as part 2. How about somebody online who wants to start? Jared?
I prefer the Moon Pit area. One thing I am a little disappointed in is that it is the shape of it. I'd like to see the shape a little different, and I would hope that in the future there'd be some attempt to try to expand the boundaries of that to make it a little better shape. But that's my preference.
Erica, would you like to speak next?
Yeah, I think the recommendation for Moon Pit, really no other additional comments outside of what everybody has said. I mean, it makes sense. It's a current industrial site, and there's potentially less environmental and wildlife impacts to this particular area. But yes, Moon Pit is what I would recommend.
Okay. Keith, are you still online?
Yes, I'm here. Yes, thank you all. Thank you to the committee and to Parametrics and everyone's hard work on this. I agree with the rest of the committee members at this point. I think that based on all the feedback we've received and all the due diligence that Parametrics has put in, I think the Moon Pit site makes the most sense for the next, to 50 to 100 years. As Mike was saying earlier, this is a really long-term decision, but I think it's important that we're making the best decision for the future. I agree that because of the disturbance that's already occurred at Moon Pit, I think it lessens the environmental impact there compared to the Roth East site. Also, one thing it's been mentioned a couple times, but I really think it's important, is that the observatory at Pine Mountain is one of the 2 observatories left in the state besides the one we have here in Sun River. And I think it needs to be, more attention paid to that. And I think to protect that as much as possible for future generations is really important. And so I think that the Moon Pit site, unfortunately, the financial impact is a bit more, but I do think it's a better location and for the future of this type of infrastructure and for the future of Deschutes County.
Thank you, Keith. Mayor Fitch?
Yeah, for all the reasons that's been stated, I agree with Moon Pit. I also think the port's a little closer over a long period of time. That will make a big difference. But yeah, for all the reasons stated, Moon Pit.
Thank you. And last but not least, Paul.
So I think when those of us that were around in 2018, when we were going through updating the management plan for the county, the decision to site a landfill versus hauling our waste up to the gorge was about transportation costs. And I think the Moon Pit is far superior to the Ross site. That 16 miles round trip means a lot when you're talking, the number of trips per day, every day of the year, potentially for 100 years. That adds up to a huge number. And I think it's a big consideration. And I also feel a lot more comfortable with Fish and Wildlife's view on the Moon Pit over the Ross site, with their primary concern being on habitat loss. So they're not going to like either one, but they were more concerned with the Ross site. So that definitely influenced my decision.
Great. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.
Sounds like we have consensus on Moon Pit.
Yeah.
It does indeed. So with that, I think we may want to, would somebody like to craft a motion? And I don't know if it's 2 parts or 2 separate motions based on what I heard from you earlier, Mike.
Sure, we could do the first part and then, so I move that we recommend to the Board of County Commissioners, Moon Pit for the final site choice of the SWAC for a future landfill for Deschutes County.
I'll second.
So moved by Mike Riley, seconded by Chris Orgren. Any discussion, further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Passes unanimously.
So the second piece I wanted to propose to the committee is that from the environmental perspective, and I think given the values of our community today, whether that's concerns about game and hunting and fishing or protection of potentially endangered species, and also the recreation impacts that are going to come even at Moon Pit, I'd like to have us encourage the commissioners to work carefully with the community to craft a robust and comprehensive mitigation strategy that really protects wildlife to the extent we can, and that reduces the impacts, because there is a lot of recreation impacts even at the Moon site when you think about public use on the Badlands and public use of the Horse Ridge area, whether that's people walking, people cycling, backpacking, all that sort of stuff. And while I don't know that today, we're going to have all the details worked out, I think some of the suggestions that come in the letter from Honda and others today helps us kind of begin to shape that. So I'd like to see us as a committee make that part of our recommendation. I know it's outside of the scope of this immediate question before us, but my experience with advisory committees like this is that stuff comes up during the process. And, with my other hat at the city council, we often get, here's what the questions you asked us to answer, and here's how we're answering those. But here's the other stuff that we identified that's important that we want you to consider as you move forward as, a group of elected officials. So I'd like to
propose that we make some kind of a motion. I can think about the wording here in a minute, but just wanted to get a sense of the committee about that before we move forward.
Mike, I think it's a good idea. So you're suggesting that some of this mitigation plan would involve a committee and rather than just the consultants and county staff?
I haven't thought about the specifics of how. I think it's more just encouraging the commissioners to actually look carefully at how we can craft a robust mitigation plan that really is consistent with the environmental values of today. And I think as is pointed out in Anda's letter, this is an important statewide decision. I mean, we are talking about citing a landfill, in 2023 through 2024 forward, right? Reflecting the values of today and the communities of today. And how can this be example for how we can do this to consider what people think is important in today's world? It might have been very different from how we approached landfill siting in the past. So it's an important model for the rest of the state.
Yeah, I agree. And if there is going to be a future to this committee, that's a role at least I would be interested in, and maybe others would be interested in here too.
Me too.
I support that proposal.
Agreed.
Is there anybody online who has a concern with that approach? And
No, I just think it's a prudent approach, and it makes sense collectively for this committee to continue in that capacity.
Dwight, would you envision that this would be done as a motion?
Yeah,
A second motion?
Yeah, that's what I would think.
Yeah.
Because that provides more power behind
Yep.
it to the commissioners for sure.
Mike, you want to take a stab at a motion?
I didn't think about that part before the meeting today. I mean, I think my motion is that we encourage the Board of County Commissioners to work carefully with all the various stakeholders and perhaps a future version of SWAC to develop and implement a robust and comprehensive mitigation strategy related to wildlife impacts, but also nearby recreation impacts. We can include in there that it's an important part of how we make decisions like this in the modern world to reflect today's values and concerns about wildlife and recreation in our part of the community, in our part of the state.
Do I hear a second?
And anybody have anything to add to that? Amend it.
Sounded good to me. I'll second it.
All right. Is there a discussion?
What do you think about adding in some carbon reduction language?
Was that you, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's just important. I think, part of the decision was to recommend the Moon Pit because it's closer and, just reducing the carbon footprint of this facility should be a long-term consideration.
Would you see that as a friendly amendment?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I think perhaps with the carbon reduction, it might be, we could also maybe tie in, Mike, you mentioned it at first, like somehow tying in a focus on waste prevention and waste diversion. Because one of the things that I think came to my mind with this too is one of the other downsides of the Moon Pit site is that it does have a shorter lifespan, and it's not significantly shorter, but in 100 years, probably some people will be bummed that we didn't pick the one that had another 13 years. So I think it's important with one that has a slightly shorter lifespan that there's a big focus on the waste prevention, which is the total amount of waste sent there is a contributor of the greenhouse gas emissions in addition to the transportation, I believe. So I don't know if that's making it too convoluted to tie all those things together. But it's important from the city of Bend's perspective. Both those things are important, and I heard it reflected in other comments as well.
I'd suggest maybe that's a third, we could have that as a third motion, and it, you know, that's the other recommendation, that we, as quickly as possible, shift to also looking at waste prevention and recovery strategies, and how we get, you know, as assertive and robust with those as soon as possible. And I know there's already plans in the works for that, but that could be part of the task of, you know, a future SWAC. Looking at that. So maybe we do that as a third motion. That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a different topic.
Yeah, I would support that, even though I'm not a voting member. Yeah. So the motion is that the board consider including a robust mitigation plan to minimize impacts on wildlife and recreation. And looking at ways to continue to reduce the greenhouse gas impacts of the landfill. Okay, any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Is there another
We
motion?
got one more.
You want,
The waste prevention one?
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't thinking about it. I guess it would just be recommending that the Board of County Commissioners prioritizes waste diversion and prevention strategies. You said something really good, Mike. Do you have anything?
yeah, that we shift as rapidly as possible to doing a robust investigation of waste prevention and recovery strategies.
Yeah,
And as soon as possible.
as soon as
But
possible.
that's equally important, and in particular because our recommendation has a slightly shorter lifespan. So extending that is going to be important. Looks like we might have a public comment.
Yeah.
We
Hey, can you come up to the microphone just for the folks who are online? Thank you, Tim.
My name is Tim Shimke, and I am a private citizen. Congratulations. I can't commit the county to anything, okay? I would just suggest, I think this is a good motion you're working on, but I would emphasize the fact that we're moving from a situation where 80% of all the waste that goes in this landfill comes to our gate without any expense to the solid waste department, this whole Bend area, right? And so now we're picking all this waste up and we're moving it out to the Moon Pit. And so that greenhouse gas impact, that transportation cost, I think you should mention that that's the impetus for really putting a focus on waste reduction and recovery.
So reduce the number of trips essentially, right? And what you're getting at
Reduce the cost to the county.
overall and the
Right,
cost. Yeah.
right. I mean, that's, you know, what, $1 million, $1.5 million a year expense that we have not borne that will happen once we close this landfill. And so, I mean, just that economic impact alone will drive more waste diversion and recovery, you know, but I think it's a good idea to point that out to the commissioners in a motion like this, but I would emphasize that added cost, that added greenhouse gas emission that we're forced to deal with here.
Yeah, thank you, Tim.
So part of the reasoning on that motion is that because it'll help with control the costs of the landfill by
For the county, yeah.
to the county and to the ratepayers, and also reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Kinda. Yeah, the
Question.
yeah, the Board of County, do you have a question?
No, there was one.
Yeah,
Yeah, the colors.
I'm Phyllis, and is this the last meeting?
yes,
Oh, I just wanted to thank you all.
all right. Thank you,
Glad to Be able to be part of this process.
thank you. All right, so we have a motion and a second for the Board of County Commissioners to prioritize waste prevention and reduction and to move as quickly as possible to implement these strategies to reduce costs and environmental impact of wasting. How's
Yeah.
that?
Sure. I think we want to say waste prevention and recovery.
Got it. Waste and recovery. environmental impacts and greenhouse gases. All right. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comment?
Sure, I second that motion.
You seconded that? Yeah.
Cassie moved and I second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes. Any other motions?
I thought it was.
Yeah, so there was.
I made a lot of comments that may sound as negative here, but I wanted to thank Parametrics and your group and Tim, you too, patience and a lot of good work in that report.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have to hand it to the SWAC and to the county. Always for really sticking to this and, working through it and really, deliberating on these issues from day one, not just now, but, the comments and substance that we got out of these meetings has been invaluable in this process. It's really been good public process.
Yeah. And I really want to thank, I'm going to thank several people. I want to thank Tim Shimke and even the previous Board of County Commissioners for stepping into the solid waste management plan, which really projected and developed the future pathways for the solid waste department and for the county, which included the development of this process. I really want to thank all the members of the public who commented and participated and endured. This is citing landfill is it's a technical process, but it's a participatory process and it's an emotional process. And many people in this community were impacted by the conversations that this group had, and the solid waste department and the consultants did our best to make it inclusive and as transparent as possible. And in some ways we were very successful. In some ways we may have been delinquent, and I think we've learned from it, but we appreciate that people have been engaged, stay engaged, and really help us understand the priorities of the community. And so I'm excited and relieved that we've gotten to this place.
Can I add one thing, just to make it really clear to everybody, right, that we're making a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. They're the final decision makers on this. And so for those who have participated in the process, shouldn't walk away today thinking it's necessarily done. And encourage you to stay involved and pay attention to when this comes before the county commissioners. If you support the decision, the recommendation that we're making, that you communicate that to the commissioners or otherwise, and just continue to stay engaged as we move through the process. That there may be some things that were outside of the scope of what this committee looked at that may come up in some of those discussions, and so folks will have to consider that and let the commissioners know what they think about any of that additional information or additional stuff that comes up. And in particular, I want to thank those folks who, as Tim said, endured through the process. There are people here today who've been here at almost every single meeting, and we just appreciate y'all showing up and continue to be consistent throughout. It makes a big difference.
And last but not least, I want to thank all of you, the committee members, for an extraordinary number of hours and a lot of consideration and a lot of empathy and compassion for the people who came before us. So thank you very much. So with that, I'll entertain the motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
Sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. We are adjourned.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
We do not yet. No. Yeah, major, but we have to agendize it and work with the county attorney to find out how that process works.